Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and with me back is John.
Thank you, Connor. Good to be back.
So if you like what we've been doing on Plotlines, especially as of late, please like, share, and subscribe. Coming soon is also a Discord channel, so watch out for that. We will be on that. Well, I'll be on it at least, and I'll be able to take questions or just interact with you guys more. But for today's guest, we have Father Thomas Crean O.P. to discuss his book on integralism. And Father is currently located at the Priory of Leicester, or in Leicester, and he is a theologian and as well as a professor.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
Welcome, Father Crean. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, we're here to talk about your book, Integralism, as well as the philosophy of, political philosophy in general. But how was it like writing a book with a co-author?
Oh, well, it was a challenge in the sense that we both had to agree about everything. And that we had very long and sometimes quite intense discussions. We were living on different, and indeed still are living on different continents, because Alan Phimister, my co-author, is currently living in the US and I'm in England. And there was I think a 7-hour time difference between us, so that sometimes made it difficult to coordinate, but it was extremely rewarding. And I think well, I certainly learned a lot from my discussions with Alan, and it was, I think, a very good experience in the sense that it's always good to have someone looking at your work from outside, and if it's a co-author, then he's someone who's more invested in that work than anybody else could be. So it's a particularly good discipline, I think.
Yeah, especially with the time difference. That must have been very difficult.
Yes, it was sometimes. And we had some quite mammoth sessions as well, maybe 5 or 6 hours at a time as we were getting towards the end of the writing process. And sometimes we could be stuck on a single sentence for about an hour. I remember that happening once or twice. Wow. We would not be quite coming at things from the same direction sometimes, and it would be arguing over the nuance of this or that word. But it was a very entertaining experience. That's
kind of crazy. It's like sort of having to agree on words is probably the most sort of bizarre thing that nobody probably thinks about generally. Especially, I mean, I would assume anybody who can write a book such as you guys did sort of has very particular language and writing style that you almost want your writing style a certain way and the other person's going to want a certain writing style, and sort of meshing the two sounds pretty difficult. Yes,
well, we started off at the very beginning, we thought we might try to each write a version of the same chapter. But very quickly we decided that this was rather too lengthy a process, so we decided effectively to take alternate chapters, or at least we portioned the chapters out between us, and each of us wrote a draft. But that draft was then commented on by the other, and then the first person commented on the comments and so on. And so by the end, when we were discussing it over Skype, it was really a joint, very much a joint process. I suppose it helped that we have read quite a few of the same authors, and by no means there's by no means a perfect overlap between us. I've probably read more in the line of let's say scholastic authors, so authors after the time of St. Thomas, but writing in the tradition of St. Thomas. Alan is, as well as a theologian, he's a historian, which I'm not, and he's got a wide knowledge of patristic history, and also of the Byzantine Empire. So that was a very useful input, especially that it's an area of interest that's not, I think, often shared by people who write about St. Thomas. They often don't know that much about the history of the Byzantine Empire, but
Yeah.
Alan does.
Yeah. So yeah. So since we're here to talk about political philosophy, why is it important for us to talk about and learn about political philosophy? Like why did you write this book?
Why did I write the book? Well, the immediate catalyst was that I'd been teaching a course on political philosophy to some undergraduates in Ireland. And well, for one thing, I was learning as I was teaching the course. And when I'm learning something, I often find that writing about it is a good way to crystallize my own ideas. And also, I felt that there was no one book that I could really guide them to, that I could really point to as giving an account of the main ideas of political philosophy from a Catholic and a Thomistic perspective. So I thought it would be nice to have a go at writing such a book. And my co-author was teaching and had been teaching Catholic social doctrine for several years at a seminary, and then before that in a theological institute in Austria. And we'd been having a lot of discussions about these kinds of ideas over the years, but we'd never got to the stage of trying to really order them all in a logical way. So that was the background. I also have had for a number of years a particular interest in the theme of religious liberty, because I don't know if you know, but this is one of the hot topics of the last few decades in the church. So the last ecumenical council, the Second Vatican Council, gave an important teaching about religious liberty. But ever since then, there's been lots of questions about A, what exactly it meant, and B, exactly how it fits in with the previous teaching documents or whole tradition of the church. Because the tradition of the church is very much in favor of those with political power using it to help the mission of the church. And at least prima facie, there can seem to be a tension between that and the idea of religious liberty. So this is something that I've been thinking about for a number of years. And one of the things I was wanting to do in the book is to try to unravel these various knotty problems.
Father, I think it'd be important for our listener to know, like, why do you think we need like government? Why do we need an authority to, kind of tell us what to do?
Oh, that's an interesting. I don't normally get that question, but well, I think the first thing to say is that even though those in authority can use their authority badly, or they can annoy us in various ways, we shouldn't think of government itself as an evil, or even as a necessary evil, but as part of the natural order of things as willed and created by God. So as we learn from Genesis, God created man to rule over the garden, and I think that Adam would have had political authority as over his offspring as well. I think he would have been the king and the high priest of creation if he'd remained unfallen, just as our Lord, the new Adam, is king and high priest in a higher way. More concretely, we could say that individual human beings are engaged in earning a living or making a living in some way and looking after their family, bringing up their children, saying their prayers, meeting their friends, pursuing their hobbies. But they're also by nature social animals. We by nature desire to live in a society that extends beyond our own family, which is what we call temporal society, made up of a union of families. And that needs to have some kind of structure. It needs to have some kinds of laws, and it needs to have someone looking after it. And that's what government is. It's looking after this union of families we call society, so that it doesn't either break up or descend into chaos or into civil war. That, I think, is the simplest answer.
Yeah, there's just a huge sort of push for the belief that that government is illegitimate entirely, and that nobody should be ruling us. And at some points, not to that fullest extent, but to some degree, I've fallen into that over the years. Previously, and it took a while to come completely around to sort of the integralist manner of thinking. But it really is a prominent position these days. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think probably because in the modern world, what we find is governments that are over-centralized, and that there is a lack of what we call subsidiarity. So subsidiarity, the idea that decisions should be made at the lowest level possible rather than at the highest level. So in most modern countries, we have, for example, governments presuming to dictate the syllabuses of education for all children. And you very much, in Britain, you have the idea, so it's sort of in the air very much now, or perhaps you could say even worse than in the air, in the soil, that bringing up children is basically the business of the state. And the state might decide to let parents do a bit of it, or even do a lot of it, but that's the state's decision. So you find the question being framed in the way of, should we allow parents to choose their schools? Should we allow parents to educate their children at home? As if it was the decision of the government whether or not to allow such a thing. And that's, of course, a completely upside down way of looking at things. It's the business of parents to educate their children. And if they should decide to hire servants, such as whether state officials or private servants, private teachers, to help them do this job, then that's the parents' decision. So there's a healthy reaction, I think, against government overreach. But as with all overreactions, it's the nature of human beings. That reaction can easily become an overreaction. And I think going into the direction of libertarianism and wanting to abolish the state, or at least considering the state as being per se an evil or necessary evil, I think that's an overreaction.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of the family and the assault on the family by the government, and so it really makes me think of the basic unit of society. So will you explain what the basic unit of society is?
Right. So that phrase, the basic unit or basic cell of society, comes in papal teaching, I think, in the 20th century. So it's the family is what's meant by that phrase, and that phrase I think is coined by the popes, or at least by those summarizing the papal teaching, probably in the context of education, and to express this idea that because parents have brought their children into the world, it belongs to them first and foremost to prepare their children for adulthood, prepare their children to take their place in society. So children don't come under the authority of the state directly, immediately. They're under the authority of their parents. Now, if their parents prove to be incapable of doing that job for some reason, maybe their parents are feckless or something like that, then the other authorities will have to step in. But that's very much an extraordinary and abnormal state of affairs. So it's also connected with the idea that that marriage itself is not a creation of the state. So it's not the state that decides that there is going to be such a thing as marriage, and these are its laws. The state that decides marriage is going to be an indissoluble contract or a dissoluble contract, or it's going to be dissoluble if there's a fault on both sides or one side or something like that. No, marriage is what it is because God is what he is. As to say, it's a reflection of the very nature of God himself, that human beings are what they are, and that they have to bring up their children in such a way. So it's marriage which precedes political power and gives rise to it. It's the union of families which constitutes a temporal society.
Yeah. I have actually a scenario that I recently heard from somebody about sort of a parents that basically were they were baptized Catholic, the parents were, but they have no intent to letting or having their kids baptized until they're like old enough to like basically confirmation. Their understanding of baptism is basically confirmation, where it's their duty to wait until they know what's going on to be baptized. Would it be sort of valid in that sense? Because since the parents are Catholic, or I guess since the are in the sense of they were baptized, but that would it be of like the authority of the church in a sense to say that those parents are not raising their kids properly, or losing some sort of authority over those kids for basically leaving their kids open to death, or death without being baptized for like 15 years or whatever?
So are you asking whether the bishop of that diocese where those parents live would have a right to separate their children from the parents, or what he should do? Is that the
that's
question?
kind of my
that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, he has the right to impose certain sanctions on them if they're not performing their Christian duties. And one of the most important duties of the Christian parents is to obviously to baptize their children and raise them as Catholics. It would seem like a rather drastic step to talk about separating the children from the parents. I think, and you could also wonder whether it would be likely to have its desired effect anyway. Whether it would be more likely to create resentment in the children against the church, and that's going to be counterproductive. I mean, there are certainly spiritual penalties that can be applied to the parents, like excommunication for a certain period. I mean, I suppose if they're not practicing their faith themselves, then that's not going to bother them.
Fortunately,
Um,
is
but,
it within the bishop's authority, at least? Even like, we don't have to necessarily, or figure out whether or not it'd be the right decision to do, but would it be under the spiritual authority, as you said it out in the book?
would it be under his spiritual authority to step in and make sure the children get a well, the thing is, the children are not baptized. The children
Yeah.
are not under his authority.
So it's slightly a
it's
weird.
the parents who are.
Yeah.
So he can. I mean, as in a situation outside Christendom, so where there is no, where the temporal power is not cooperating with the church, obviously all he can do is to impose some kind of spiritual penalty, such as excommunication. In a Christendom situation, where the political power would be willing to cooperate with the hierarchy, well, it's a question I'd have to think about, to be honest. I don't want to say that it's not within his authority, because obviously they are committing a serious breach of duty. But I'm just wondering whether there are historical examples of bishops doing such a thing, and offhand, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
But to kind of go back to where you talk about when we talk about the family as the basic unit of society, you were bringing up some like interesting examples of like school choice and the parents' kind of rights over their children, and it's kind of ironic because a lot of that is a lot of hot topics in today's society in America.
Yeah.
But I was just curious if you think, like, do families or individuals have an authority over the government? Like, certainly there's steps that they can take, like voting people out, in or out, sort of that in that way. But like at a certain point, like when does the family kind of, I don't know, are they like more, do they have more authority than the government, to put it like that?
Well, yes, in one sense, it depends on the constitution of the society.
Mm-hmm.
So in a democratic society, then they've got the authority in the sense that they can vote for some other people at election time. In general, the authority of the rulers does not as such depend on the continuing consent of the governed. Even if in a given society they have the right to determine who the bearers of power are, who to vote for their congressmen or their members of parliament. What they're doing there is to designate the people to whom God himself confers the right to govern. And that's why, unless they've got a particular constitutional setup allowing this, they can't just decide, say in the middle of a term of office, they can't just say we're fed up with this man, we're going to put somebody else in instead. On the other hand, we argue in our book that it is possible for government to degenerate into tyranny to such an extent that it's making clear that it's no longer interested in doing what it exists to do, to govern for the good of the common good. So it seems to me that there is such a thing as rulers effectively discarding their own authority while trying to cling to the brute power. In that case, I don't rule out the. I don't like using the word revolution because I think it's got bad connotations, but I don't rule out, let's just say, an unconstitutional change of power. But
Gotcha.
things, I think, have to get pretty desperate before that can be contemplated.
Right.
Yeah, things are, or it's hard to measure that. And like most revolutions that we think of at, like in the Western world I would say probably don't qualify for such a change of power. What do you think? Do you think, like, in regards like to the specifically American Revolution, I guess, but and I think definitely not the French Revolution. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think that historically, the revolutions have tended to be revolutions against Christendom, and that's why that's one of the reasons I dislike the word.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, it's really something that can only be legitimate. It can only be legitimate, I think, to displace those who are in power, if they are really effectively destroying their own society. And I'm not sure that can be applied to revolutions in the Western world that we've seen in the last couple of 100 years. I mean, St. Paul gives us the basic principle in Romans 13, where he says, as you know, submit to the higher powers, because there is no power but from of God. And he says, do this not just to avoid punishment, but for conscience sake. And the man who was in charge in Rome at that time was one of the most evil rulers in the whole of history, Emperor Nero. And it's no doubt providential that God inspired St. Paul to write those words when there was such a bad ruler in charge of the empire. I mean, it's true that the Nero's iniquity was, as far as I know, essentially on a personal level, but I mean, he was also degrading the daughters of some of the leading men of Rome just for his own entertainment. And yet St. Paul doesn't countenance any kind of rebellion. And to be honest, there's very little in the tradition of the church that would do so. So in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, published in the 1990s, you get, I think, 1 or 2 sentences on this subject, which basically assimilate this question to that of just war. As you know, there are certain criteria that have to be fulfilled for just war. It has to be, the evil has to be certain and enduring, and the likelihood of success must be high, and you mustn't be a danger of doing more evil than the already suffering. And so the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, in such conditions, such activity is legitimate. But it's interesting that there's no footnote. Normally there's a footnote to almost everything in the Catechism, to some, if not to a passage in Scripture, to a papal encyclical, or to a conciliar document, or to a writing of a father or doctor of the Church. And this is a rare case where there is no footnote. And if Cardinal Ratzinger, as he then was correct when he said that things don't have any authority simply in virtue of being in the catechism, that the catechism is just a collection of things which already have authority, then that would seem to follow that there is no magisterial support for this idea of armed revolt, which is not to say that it's been absolutely ruled out, but you can see it's something that there's the church is at least very, very wary about.
Yeah, interesting enough, that makes me sort of think about the recent changes in the catechism regarding the death penalty. And that's one of the most controversial changes. And if I'm right, there's also no reference really to anything regarding that, or is there?
There may be a reference to a speech by Pope Francis about the death penalty, but I don't think there's any other reference.
So yeah, so I mean, so if Cardinal Ratzinger is right about or was right about that, do you think it's the same sort of situation, except for maybe obviously there's reasons for not using the death penalty and having the death penalty, but that it's not a strictly I guess something to be always avoided, I guess.
Yes, I would say that the legitimacy and principle of capital punishment is something that is contained in divine revelation in both the Old and the New Testament, and it's been peacefully accepted as part of the ordinary magisterium of the Church. So I think that Catholics should believe that capital punishment can be legitimate in principle, and they can disagree in practice about its application. That particular amendment in the catechism, to me, it seems to be internally incoherent. But in any case, I think that the tradition is clear enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So would you mind giving us a basic understanding of the different types of government? As you mentioned, sort of more democratic government. So what are the others?
Yeah, so historically and classically, going all the way back to Aristotle, as you know, there's this threefold distinction of government that gets made between the Greek terms monarchia, aristocratia, and democratia. So sorry, not democratia. That's the corruption of the timocracy. Timocratia is the Greek word. But in any case, so the idea is, at least in the beginning, the idea is that you can have one person in charge, and then it's a monarchia. Whether or not it's hereditary is another question. Or you can have a sort of elite group in charge, however they're conceived, whether they're a particular class, social class, whether they're a particular of particular descents of noble group, or whether they're people deemed to be particularly intelligent. So this is Plato's ideal of philosophers, and then there's the ideal of having, as far as possible, everybody in charge, everybody governing themselves, everybody governing the city. So this is a bit more plausible in Aristotle's context of a small Greek town, in effect, governing itself than it is in our modern world. But essentially, those are the three kinds of government that get discussed by philosophers down the ages. And then you get various refinements, and the idea put forward by someone like St. Thomas Aquinas that the ideal is to have a blend of these three things, and he thinks this is what God provides for the people of Israel in the old law. So you have a blend of monarchy in the sense that you've got the king in Israel, or before that one of the judges, and then you've got a kind of aristocratic element, not necessarily in the sense of noble families, though they do inevitably tend to come into being, seems by human nature over the generations, but in the sense of the Sanhedrin, which is the heir to Moses's 70 elders that he had helping him in the government. But then you've got a democratic element in the sense that anybody can take their part in the Sanhedrin. Anybody can be chosen to be to have a part in government. So there are the benefits to all these different systems, and there are disadvantages as well. But it seems to be that some element of monarchy is almost unavoidable, just because of unity being the precondition for everything else in society. Unless society is one, it can't stay together, and the unity is more easily produced by one than by many. So hence we have one prime minister or one president, and so on. So situations like the Roman Republic, where you have two people in charge, are obviously very rare, and even they took it in turns year by year.
It's
yeah.
funny
So
that
it also seems to be according to nature, and this is also part of the teaching of Leo XIII, who's one of the big influences on our book. It seems to be in accordance with nature that, as far as possible, everybody should take some share in government, and if that can't be by meeting together in the town square, as it would have been in 4th century Athens, it can at least be by electing representatives. So in that sense, democracy, while not being required by natural law, is certainly very fitting and in accordance with human nature, where possible.
Yeah. It's kind of funny yet sad that you mentioned the prime minister in regards to monarchy, yet the monarch, the queen, is not sort of doesn't seem like the real monarch of the British government.
Yes, well, technically she is, in the sense that nothing can become a law unless it receives royal assent. But it's been a very long time indeed since anything that was voted by Parliament didn't receive the royal assent. I think about 100 years ago, the king of the day was unhappy with the decision of Parliament to introduce life peers as well as hereditary peers, and he was making noises about not signing this bill, but he was warned that there would be a revolution if he didn't. I don't know whether that was true or not, but in any case, he decided to sign it. And since then, I don't think there's been any serious example of a monarch not signing a piece of legislation. I mean, lots of people wish that the present Queen had not done so in regard to the Abortion Act in 1967, or in regard to the what I call the Abolition of Marriage Act, the Same-Sex Marriage Act, more recently. She probably conceives it as her duty to sign whatever is put before her, I imagine.
Yeah, that does seem like the way she leads. But yeah, no.
If you could go into a little bit more of like, why does St. Thomas Aquinas think a monarchy is the best like system of government?
Single type of government.
Yeah.
Well, he thinks that it's it's the most unifying form of government.
Okay.
So he talks about peace as being that which rulers should aim at above all. Peace in the very, I think he's got in mind a very deep sense of the word, so not just not being any fighting going on, but
Right.
the harmony when every part is in its place and doing what it should.
Mhm.
And he takes it to be obvious that when there is a monarch in the sense of a single ruler, because he is one, he is more able to produce unity and therefore peace in the society that he governs. So he's got an interesting argument that so there's this idea that the corruption of the best is the worst, and obviously if monarchy in his sense is the best, then it would follow that a tyrannical monarch or a tyrant would be the worst.
Right.
Which he says is true in the abstract, but he thinks in practice it doesn't quite work out like that, and it's worse to have a group of people at the top competing for supreme power, because that sort of sets up a permanent state of faction within society, which means we're always on the brink of civil war. Where he says even if you've got a tyrant, even if the man in charge is a tyrant, in practice he's not going to be acting as a tyrant all day long. He's going to be doing a number of good things, and so it's normally better, he thinks, to put up with the tyrant rather than to get rid of him.
That's
He
interesting.
also thinks it better represents the government of God. So God, of
Right.
course, is one. So God's government over the universe in that sense is a monarchy. So he probably thinks it's easier for people to understand that people with political power are receive that power from God if in some way their rule resembles that of God.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's stated in the book, and I think that it's a quote from Aristotle about it's easier to find one good person to rule than to find many good people to rule. Is that am I quoting it correctly? Sort of.
There is a line like that in Aristotle. There, I think the immediate context of that is the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law, in the sense that you just need one person to, if he's got the political power, one person to institute a good law, whereas if you have only judges trying, each case without a law to guide them, then they have to be good every time. Whereas if you've got a good law, then your judges can be fairly mediocre, but provided they're basically honest and decent, they can still do a good job.
Yeah, I think that seems to be a bit of a problem these days. Is judges aren't really following the law; they're just following themselves. They've kind of taken it upon themselves, seemingly, to do the opposite, to act as there's no law. But
Yes, so I mean, historically, it's understood that there's three branches of government. There's the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. So I think one of the things that we suggest in the book is that when a society becomes disunited, and say a democratic society becomes disunited, and the elites become discontented with the masses, as it were, and discontented with the representatives elected by the people, then judges are liable to take it upon themselves to interpret, in quotation marks, the law according to their own mentality, and in practice to be acting as legislators and not just as judges anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, it seems to me that there's sort of this interesting argument that Bellarmine and Aquinas make sort of against, or not necessarily, not always against necessarily, but just ambiguous or less interested in like hereditary rule. But given sort of the historical like stability of hereditary rule, why do you think the at least specifically Bellarmine and sort of ambiguously or maybe ambiguously Aquinas sort of makes those arguments?
Why they're not certain about the value of hereditary
Yeah.
monarchy, is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes, it was very interesting that St. Thomas writes a whole book. I mean, it's quite a small book, but it's nevertheless a book about kingship called De Regno, on the kingship, making arguments for monarchy, but never mentions the idea of heredity. Now, he's certainly not ruling it out, but he's got other examples in mind. So in his time, you've got, of course, hereditary monarchs, King of France or King of England, but you've also got elected monarchs, such as the Holy Roman Empire, Holy Roman Emperor, or the rulers of Italian city-states. So he doesn't address the question at all, as far as I know. It's an interesting question why he doesn't.
Yeah.
Perhaps he just didn't have time. It might be something as simple as that. He was a very busy man.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are advantages and disadvantages as in all human things. I mean, Bellarmine makes sort of points going in opposite directions. One of which is that the obvious one, that hereditary monarch is the luck of the draw. You might get a very mediocre person. You might get a brilliant person. You don't know what you're going to get. But the other point he makes is that the person can be prepared from boyhood for office, and also I don't think he makes this point, but it's an important point, because he knows he's going to be there for life. He doesn't need to be doing things which are going to please the masses, but which are going to be bad in the long run. He can take the long view. And another advantage of hereditary monarchy, I think, is that it puts the family in the forefront of people's minds, and it gives a certain concreteness, I would say, to this rather theoretical point about the family being the unit of society. If there is a royal family, governing family, then lends a kind of familial atmosphere to the entire nation. I think it helps to bind the people together. So these are some of the advantages and disadvantages, and to some extent, it may be a matter of temperament, which people prefer. I mean, in general, if something is working, then it shouldn't be disturbed. That's another important consideration.
Yeah, makes sense. Stability seems to be the almost one of the most most important factors regarding like a good government. If you have a good government, keeping it stable, not messing around with it, seems to be what to me a good standard. So we've discussed a little bit about like we've discussed the different types. We talked about democracy, or sort of what's the original version like that's not democracy technically?
Well, Aristotle uses the phrase timocracy,
Democracy.
which it was connected with the Greek word for honor, but it seems in his language to refer to a certain people who have a certain income. So it's not actually in his vocabulary. It's probably not absolutely everybody. It's certainly not the slaves in ancient Greece. They're certainly not voting, but let's say it's householders, people who have sort of the income of your average householder. So in his language, that's the rule by the many, and he uses the word democracy to refer to the corruption of that, when the many are ruling for their own interests and against the elites.
Yeah. How does that?
But
Sorry. No,
I was just going to say, but of course, in modern language, democracies come to refer just to rule by everyone. It doesn't have that pejorative sense it would have had for Aristotle.
If only it did. But the sort of how does that relate to the republic? Because I've always heard that the sort of the bad version of the good version was republic and the bad version is democracy. That's how I had heard it. But so what would like Aristotle have considered a republic?
Well, I mean, republic is a Latin word.
There you go.
I mean, it's ambiguous. I mean, it has been used in different senses. It's been used in a very broad sense, just to refer to the body politic, the temporal society.
Okay.
And in that sense, it would be equivalent to Aristotle's word polis, the city-state. It's been used to refer to anything which isn't a hereditary monarchy. But it's yes, so that's probably its most common use in more modern centuries. But it's not always used in contradiction to monarchy as such, because the Polish kings, they were, if I believe I'm correct in saying, they were elected like the Holy Roman emperors, but they were called kings.
Yeah.
But they were called kings of the Republic of Poland, which is a bit confusing for modern.
I thought it was
people.
a commonwealth. Not a well, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know what the Polish word would have been.
Or I thought that's how the English translation of it would be commonwealth instead of republic, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, if it could be translated republic, at least in the old sense of the word.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Body politic.
So we've discussed all the different types. Will you explain to us sort of the main structure, or how the church's political structure is supposed to be, set up, like with that, with the mixed government in mind?
Are you referring to the internal life of the church?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've obviously got we've got the church as a whole, and you've got each diocese, and really the same mixed polity, as it's called, should exist, I would say, in the church in both forms. So to take the highest, the church as a whole, obviously you've got the Pope, who is a monarch. He's got the fullness of all the three powers: judicial, executive, and legislative. You've got the aristocratic, quotation marks, aristocratic element, which you could see of as being either the bishops or the cardinals. Because the bishops, and this is quite an important point that's not always appreciated these days, the bishops are not delegates of the Pope, they're not vicars of the Pope. If they're delinquent, then he can replace them, but they have ordinary power in their own diocese. They are the vicars of Christ within their own diocese. So it's not as if the Pope is like the leader of a political party, and the bishops are meant to be adopting his policies as such. And then the democratic element, well, that's rather reduced at the moment. It exists, at least in the sense that any baptized male can become a bishop or indeed the Pope if he's elected, but it's obviously rather unlikely that a non-bishop, indeed a non-cardinal, is going to be elected. So in the early centuries, the democratic element was much more marked, in that it was expected that the choice of a bishop would be approved by the clergy and laity of the diocese. So the laity weren't going into the town hall and putting crosses against a name on a ballot paper, or what is it you're doing over there? You punch a hole in a ballot paper. Is that right?
Yeah, you fill in like a bubble.
Yeah, fill in a bubble.
Okay, but they were gathering in the cathedral or in the square outside the cathedral, and they were making their opinions known, and so the bishop of the diocese would normally be chosen with the consent, at least, of the clergy and the laity, and that consent of the laity would be the democratic element in the church's makeup. And I think we quote in the book a saying from Pope Saint Leo I, that he who rules over all should be chosen by all. So you have these strong statements in the patristic era that it's very fitting that the faithful laity should have a role in determining, accepting their bishop. And then obviously this means this will only work if the bishops do their job of keeping the laity well instructed, and being brave in disciplining and indeed excommunicating members of the laity who are heretics or who are leading scandalous lives. But I think if the bishops do that job, then it would be a very healthy thing for the democratic element in the church to revive in some way.
Yeah, very
I
interesting.
mean, there is still a vestige of that in the rite of installation of a bishop. When a bishop is installed, there is a point in the ceremony in which the people have an opportunity to consent to it. But I think they give out booklets at the beginning of the ceremony, and it says, something like, at this point the people say, "We do." It doesn't really give them much choice. But
Here is the answer.
If the man being put forward is clearly unworthy, then I would say the laity have the right to say we don't.
Could you imagine that happening? It would be that I think there are stories in the church where they would send a priest and these like to be the pastor of a church or even a bishop of a church or of a diocese, and the laity would know that this person was this priest or bishop was a heretic, and they would throw them out of the church. So it seems a little like that.
Yes, in current canon law, you're not allowed to lay hands on a bishop. I
Yeah.
suppose if you hadn't been consecrated yet, it would be all right.
It used to be, I think you couldn't lay hands on a priest, right?
I think so.
Priest.
And in current law, I think you're not allowed to lay hands on a priest if you do so out of hatred for the priesthood.
Oh, okay. So there's
It's only
a
limited to that.
there's a caveat.
No self-defense.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So
But you could block the doorway. I mean, you could block the doorway without using force against the bishop.
now you're just giving everyone ideas.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Yeah. So if we want to wrap things up a bit, I just wanted to I found you on Twitter. That's how I found you actually. And that's why I reached out to you to come onto the podcast. But one of my favorite tweets of yours is in response to, I think it was maybe a Jesuit or a Franciscan, maybe, I can't remember which. It's probably insulting to both if it's not that, who complained about not being able to bless same-sex unions. And you said that it's not, and they were like, I can bless a tractor, but I can't bless people. And you said it's not a sin to be a tractor.
Yes, so he was asking the question, so I was explaining to him. He was, to be fair, he wasn't either a Jesuit nor a Franciscan. I don't
Oh,
think.
it wasn't?
I think a diocesan priest.
It's just that at least Jesuits just make me think of them as makes me want to put them together, because that's how they feel sometimes. But yeah,
Especially in American.
but yeah, it was just a
That's-
fantastic tweet. Thank you for being on Twitter. I think there's a lot of people that appreciate your voice in the Twitter sphere.
Well, thank you. It's a strange kind of world with its own dangers and temptations, but hopefully one can do a little bit of good in spreading some kinds of information or boosting morale. So that's what I hope I can do.
Yeah, your work, your writing, everything everything that I've interacted with that you've done is just very helpful and inspiring, and I'm really grateful for everything.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind.
Yeah. So, John, do you have anything to say?
No, it was great to meet you, Father, and great work.
Yeah. So
Nice to meet you.
So I will leave a link in the description for people to find the book you and Alan Fimister wrote together. And is there any other links that you might want people to know about, or anything that you want to send people?
You could put a link to the Dialogos Institute. So that's a group that he and I and various other people run, and it's got a blog which has articles about sort of a wide variety of issues, but some of them are ones that we've touched on today. So that might be interesting for some of your listeners.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds great. Thank you everyone for listening. Please, show us your support, show Father your support. I will also have his Twitter, his as at on Twitter in the description, so you can check him out. But yeah, thank you everyone for watching and listening, and have a wonderful day.